Welcome, candidates, to this explainer masterclass on fixed income spreads. I'll be your tutor for this session, and we're focusing strictly on the essential concepts you absolutely need to conquer the spreads portion of your CFA Level 1 exam. Now, I know spreads can feel a little intimidating at first, but honestly, they represent a pretty simple idea. It's just the additional compensation you, as the investor, demand for taking on risks beyond a basic risk-free benchmark rate. Today, we're going to break down exactly why one bond yields more than another, and we'll give you the exact tools to analyze those differences perfectly on exam day. Ready? Let's dive right in.
Here is our masterclass syllabus for today's session. We'll cover 1. The yield spread foundation. 2. Z-spread versus OAS. 3. What drives the spread. 4. CFA exam pro tips. And 5. A spreads pop quiz.
All right, Section 1, the yield spread foundation.
First up is the G-spread. Think of that G as standing for government. This is your standard baseline measure. You simply take the yield to maturity of a credit-risky bond, like a corporate bond, for example, and subtract the yield to maturity of a benchmark government bond that has a similar maturity. It's literally just revealing the extra compensation you're demanding for taking on that specific corporate credit risk instead of just playing it safe and lending to the government.
Next, we have the I-spread, and that I stands for interpolated. Now, what's really interesting here is the shift in our benchmark. Instead of using a government bond, the I-spread uses swap rates. Why would we do that? Well, it's incredibly common in certain markets where the swap market is actually way more liquid than the government bond market. We use mathematical interpolation to find the exact benchmark rate for bonds that might fall somewhat awkwardly between standard maturity dates.
I've put together this definitive comparison table for you because, let me tell you, exam writers absolutely love to test your ability to instantly recognize these specific benchmarks. If a question mentions swap rates, your mind needs to instantly jump to the I-spread. No hesitation. And if the exam mentions spot rates, boom, your brain needs to immediately flag the Z-spread, which uses the Treasury spot curve and assumes zero volatility in interest rates. Memorize these associations, guys. They are guaranteed easy points on exam day.
Moving right along to Section 2, Z-spread versus OAS.
Okay, so understanding this relationship is notoriously tricky, so I want you to think about renting a house. The Z-spread, that's just your standard rent for a totally normal, predictable property. But what if your landlord decides to write a bizarre embedded clause into your lease saying they have the right to buy or can essentially kick you out of the house whenever they feel like it? That adds a ton of risk for you as the renter, right? You absolutely wouldn't pay standard rent for that kind of uncertainty. You demand a massive discount. Well, that discounted rent is your OAS, or option-adjusted spread. You're getting compensated for accepting the landlord's embedded call option.
And that handy renting analogy brings us right to our mathematical formula. Because you, the investor, demand a higher yield for the very real risk of a callable bond being suddenly taken away by the issuer, we have to isolate the true spread. So we take the overall Z-spread and we subtract the value of that embedded option. What's left over is the option-adjusted spread. And hey, if the option value is 0, meaning it's just a standard vanilla bond with no weird clauses, then your OAS simply equals your Z-spread. Make sense?
Listen at, because you need to burn this mnemonic in your brain right now. COAS. C-O-A-S. It stands for callable OAS is smaller. For a callable bond, the OAS will absolutely always be smaller than the Z-spread. Period. Oh, and here's a quick bonus tip for you. For a puttable bond, the OAS is actually larger than the Z-spread because that embedded option benefits you, the investor. But honestly, just write down COAS in the margins of your scratch paper the literal second you sit down for the exam.
Section 3. What drives the spread?
You know, a spread isn't just some arbitrary number they slap on a bond to mean risk. It's actually a very specific cocktail driven by 3 main ingredients. First up is credit risk. Realistically, what's the probability the issuer completely defaults, and if they do go under, what's our expected recovery rate? Second is liquidity risk. How much is it going to cost us to exit this position quickly without having to take a massive price haircut? And finally, taxation. Certain bonds offer sweet tax advantages compared to their taxable peers, and those advantages will actually tighten or lower their spreads. Okay, Section 4, CFA exam pro tips.
Your very first major pro tip is all about mental math. I promise you the exam is going to aggressively mix yields and percentages and spreads in basis points just to confuse you and slow you down. Always, always convert them to decimals immediately. Remember that 100 basis points equals exactly 1%.
So, if a treasury yields 4.5% and the spread is 125 basis points, you convert that to 0.045 plus 0.0125. Seriously, getting tripped up on decimal places is an unforced error you simply cannot afford on game day.
Let's run through 4 more critical traps you need to dodge. First, that benchmark trap we discussed earlier. Spot the word swap, pick I spread. Spot spot rates, pick Z spread. Don't overthink it. Second, master your BA2 Plus calculator. When calculating spreads, store the Treasury YTM in STO1 and the corporate YTM in STO2. Use the recall function to subtract them so you don't lose precision by rounding midway. Third, understand relative value. If a bond's market spread is significantly wider than what its credit risk justifies, that bond is considered cheap or undervalued, because a high yield means a low price. If the spread is narrower, it's rich or overvalued. And finally, don't sleep on the ethics and GIPS crossover. If you're reporting bond performance, using a G spread when an I spread is the universally accepted industry standard for that specific asset class could absolutely be flagged as a violation of fair representation.
All right, let's wrap this up with Section 5, Spreads Pop Quiz. Listen to this first scenario carefully. A 10-year corporate bond has a Z spread of 150 basis points. The embedded call option value is 30 basis points. What is the option-adjusted spread closest to? Think back to our renting analogy and apply that COAS mnemonic we talked about. I'll give you a second. If you guessed A, you absolutely nailed it. By simply subtracting the 30 basis point option value right out of the 150 basis point Z spread, we land perfectly at an OAS of 120 basis points. The callable OAS is smaller. It's a simple, effective method and a guaranteed right answer. Let's hit question 2. Which spread measure is most appropriate for a bond that matures exactly between 2 available benchmark government bond maturities? Look for the key word here, indicating a bond that's maturing awkwardly between standard available dates.
The correct answer here is B, the I spread. Because the bond matures right between benchmarks, it's what we call an off-the-run maturity. The I spread mathematically interpolates the appropriate rate to ensure we get an incredibly accurate benchmark comparison. To really lock this in before exam day, I highly recommend using AI for some active recall. Take this exact prompt you see right here. Quiz me on 5 multiple-choice questions about fixed income spreads, one at a time, and explain the logic after I answer. Feed that directly into your preferred AI study tool to generate a personalized practice session. Keep drilling those calculations and spotting those keyword flags, but as you do, remember this. Beyond the textbooks and the exam questions, these spreads represent real-time human panic and confidence in the global markets. The next time a massive corporate headline breaks, I want you to ask yourself, just how fast will their Z spread widen before the market even opens? Keep studying hard, and I'll see you in the next explainer.